A hospital discharge form signed at 11:47 p.m. on a rain-soaked Thursday should have been the end of Isla Monroe's involvement with the man in room 304. 72 hours of monitoring vitals, changing for drips, and pretending she didn't notice the 4 armed men stationed outside his door. That was supposed to be the full extent of her contact with Dominic Ashford, the city's most feared syndicate leader who had taken 3 bullets to the chest during a territorial ambush outside a downtown warehouse. But when she walked into his private suite at midnight to collect the final paperwork, she found him sitting upright on the edge of the hospital bed, his chest wrapped in heavy bandages, his dark eyes locked onto her face with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. Before she could set the clipboard down on the rolling tray beside him, he said 6 words that would rewrite the entire trajectory of her life. "Sleep beside me. I'll pay whatever you want." Isla wasn't naive. She knew exactly who Dominic Ashford was. The tabloids called him the Phantom King, the man who controlled shipping routes, real estate empires, and half the city's underground economy without ever appearing in a single photograph. She also knew she was 3 months behind on rent. Her student loans were drowning her paycheck, and her 12-year-old brother needed braces she couldn't afford. But sleeping beside a Mafia boss wasn't a transaction you walked into lightly, even if the offer came wrapped in desperation instead of cruelty. Would you take money from a dangerous man to save your family, or would you walk away and let everything fall apart? Drop, take it, or walk away in the comments right now. This is the story of a nurse who thought she was being hired for one night and woke up owning half a criminal empire. Room 304 smelled like antiseptic, expensive cologne, and something darker. Gunpowder residue clinging to the leather jacket draped over the guest chair. Isla stood frozen in the doorway, her fingers gripping the discharge clipboard so tightly the plastic edges cut into her palm. Dominic didn't repeat himself. He simply watched her with the same unnerving stillness he displayed for 3 straight days while bullets were extracted from his ribs and chest cavity. No screaming, no panic, just cold, absolute control. "Mr. Ashford," Isla began carefully, her voice steady despite the frantic hammering of her pulse. "You're being discharged in the morning. Hospital policy requires I'm not asking you to violate policy." His voice was low, rough from intubation, but it carried the weight of a man accustomed to issuing commands that were never questioned. "I'm hiring you privately. One night, you sleep in that chair beside the bed. You monitor my vitals every 2 hours. If my breathing destabilizes or the sutures rupture, you call the surgical team." He paused, his gaze dropping briefly to the worn, scuffed sneakers on her feet. The kind nurses wore when they couldn't afford the expensive, gel-cushioned ones. "I'll pay you $50,000, he added. "Cash, tomorrow morning. No contract, no trace." The number hit her like a physical blow. 50,000. That was rent for an entire year, her brother's braces, the student loan payment that had been suffocating her since graduation. But it was also insane. "Why me?" Isla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have private security. You could hire an entire medical team too, because you're the only person in this building who looked at me like I was a patient instead of a threat." Dominic shifted slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at the fresh sutures across his ribs. "Every other nurse who walked into this room spent more time looking at my guards than at my vitals. You didn't. You just did your job." He gestured toward the chair. "I don't trust easily, Isla, and I don't sleep well when I'm vulnerable. But for 72 hours, you kept me alive without asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. So, I'm asking you now, stay. One night, monitor me. Make sure I don't stop breathing before sunrise." Isla swallowed hard. Every rational cell in her brain screamed that this was a terrible idea. You didn't take money from men like Dominic Ashford without consequences. Money from the underworld always came with strings. Invisible, suffocating strings that wrapped around your life until you couldn't remember where you ended and the debt began. But $50,000. She thought about her brother, Marco, sitting in their cramped apartment right now doing homework under a single flickering bulb because they couldn't afford to replace the overhead fixture. She thought about the eviction notice taped to their door. She thought about the collection agency calls she'd stopped answering 3 weeks ago. "One night," she said quietly, "just monitoring. Nothing else." "Nothing else," Dominic agreed. She set the clipboard down. pulled the guest chair closer to the bed, sat down slowly, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the heart monitor beeping steadily beside his head. Dominic leaned back against the pillows, his breathing evening out as exhaustion finally pulled at the edges of his ironclad control. "Thank you," he murmured, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. Then his eyes closed, and for the first time in 72 hours, the Phantom King let himself sleep. Isla thought staying one night would be the end of it. She had no idea that by the time the sun rose, Dominic Ashford would make her an offer that had nothing to do with medical monitoring and everything to do with the fact that she was the first person in a decade who had made him feel safe enough to close his eyes. Midnight bled into 2 a.m., then 4 a.m. The hours marked only by the soft, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor and the occasional shuffle of guards changing shifts outside the door. Isla checked his vitals every 90 minutes. Pulse steady, oxygen saturation normal, no fever. Every time she leaned over to adjust the foredrip or check the sutures beneath the bandages, Dominic's eyes would flicker open briefly, tracking her movements with sharp, quiet awareness before closing again. He didn't sleep deeply, she could tell. Even unconscious, he looked like a man waiting for the next attack. At 5 a.m., she heard him speak. "You're still here." Isla looked up from the medical chart she'd been updating. Dominic was staring at her, fully awake now, the faint gray light of early dawn filtering through the hospital blinds and casting shadows across his sharp, angular face. "You hired me to stay until morning," she replied evenly. "It's almost morning. Most people would have left the second I fell asleep and kept the money anyway. I'm not most people." A ghost of something, not quite a smile, but close, flickered across his face. He shifted slightly, sitting up against the pillows with a grimace. "Careful," Isla said, standing quickly and moving to his side. "Your sutures are still fresh. If you tear them, I've had worse. That's not the reassurance you think it is." She gently pressed him back against the pillows, her hands firm but careful on his shoulders. "You took 3 bullets to the chest, Mr. Ashford. Your body needs rest, not bravado." He looked up at her, and for a moment, the cold, untouchable mask of the syndicate leader slipped. What remained was exhaustion. Bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion that had nothing to do with bullet wounds. "When was the last time you slept more than 2 hours?" Isla asked quietly. Dominic didn't answer immediately. His jaw tightened, and she thought he might deflect or shut down the question entirely. Instead, he said, 6 years. The answer hit her harder than she expected. 6 years. Not 6 days or 6 weeks. 6 entire years of living in a state of hypervigilance so intense that even unconsciousness felt like a battlefield. "That's not sustainable," Isla said softly. "Neither is running a syndicate." His voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "The moment I let my guard down, someone takes a shot. 3 days ago, they finally landed one. 3 shots," she corrected. "And you survived because you got medical attention. You won't survive the next round if you don't let your body recover." "I'll recover faster in my own space." "Your own space doesn't have a trauma surgeon on call." "No." Dominic's gaze locked onto hers. "But it has you." Isla froze. "I'm a hospital nurse, Mr. Ashford. I can't just I'm offering you a job." He spoke over her protest, his tone shifting from exhausted to businesslike in a single breath. "Private medical care. You move into the east wing of my estate. Separate quarters. Full security. You monitor my recovery for the next 6 weeks until the surgeon clears me. After that, you stay on as my personal physician." "I'm not a physician. I'm a nurse. You're more competent than half the doctors I've met." He paused. "And you're the only person I've trusted enough to sleep near in 6 years. That's worth more than a medical degree." Isla stepped back, her mind racing. This wasn't a one-night monitoring job anymore. This was a full-scale life change. Moving into a Mafia estate. Leaving her brother. Embedding herself in a world she had spent her entire life avoiding. "I can't leave my brother," she said. "Bring him." She blinked. "What? You have a 12-year-old brother. Marco. You're his legal guardian since your parents died 4 years ago." Dominic's expression didn't change. "Bring him. I have a private tutor on staff for my nephew. Marco can join the sessions. He'll have his own room, his own space. Better than whatever apartment you're about to get evicted from." Isla's stomach dropped. "How do I don't hire people blindly, Isla? I know everything about you. Your debt. Your brother. The eviction notice. The hospital shifts you're working doubled up to keep your head above water. He leaned forward slightly, ignoring the pull of his sutures. I'm offering you a way out. Not charity. A job. You keep me alive, and I make sure you and your brother never have to choose between rent and food again. The room fell silent except for the heart monitor's steady beeping. Isla's hands trembled. This was insane. She should refuse, walk out, go back to her crumbling apartment, and figure out another way. But there was no other way. She tried. For 4 years she tried, and she was drowning. 6 weeks, she said quietly. I'll stay for 6 weeks while you recover. After that we renegotiate. Agreed. Dominic extended his hand. Isla stared at it for a long moment before reaching out and shaking it. His grip firm, warm, and strangely grounding. She thought she was agreeing to 6 weeks of medical supervision. She had no idea she just signed herself into a world where the lines between patient and protector, employee and obsession would blur so completely she'd forget where one ended and the other began. By 7 a.m. Isla was standing in the hospital parking garage beside a black armored SUV with tinted windows. Her small overnight bag slung over her shoulder and her mind still reeling from the conversation that had unfolded in room 304. Dominic's head of security, a man named Carter with a scarred jawline and eyes that missed nothing, loaded her bag into the back of the vehicle without a word. He held the door open waiting. Your brother's school has been notified, Carter said. He'll be picked up at 3 p.m. and brought directly to the estate. His belongings from your apartment will be packed and moved by tonight. Isla's head snapped toward him. I didn't agree to. Mr. Ashford doesn't wait for bureaucracy. Carter interrupted smoothly. You agreed to bring your brother. He made sure it happened. You'll have the weekend to settle in before his tutoring sessions start Monday. She wanted to argue, wanted to push back against the sheer speed at which her entire life was being reorganized without her input. But Marco would be safe, federally educated, protected, and she would finally be able to breathe. She climbed into the SUV. The door closed with a heavy, final thunk. 30 minutes later, they passed through a gated entrance and up a long, tree-lined drive that ended at a sprawling stone estate overlooking the river. It wasn't flashy, no gold fountains or excessive columns. Just quiet, understated power. The kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew it was there. Carter led her through the main entrance, past marble floors and dark wood paneling, and up a wide staircase to the second floor. He stopped in front of a heavy oak door. Your quarters, he said, pushing it open. Isla stepped inside and froze. The suite was larger than her entire apartment. A king-sized bed, a private sitting area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub, a walk-in closet already stocked with clothes in her exact size. Mr. Ashford's quarters are at the end of the hall, Carter continued. You'll find a medical supply room fully stocked 2 doors down. If you need anything, use the intercom system. Someone will respond within 2 minutes. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. Mr. Ashford doesn't allow anyone in his private quarters without explicit permission. You're the exception. If his condition destabilizes, you enter without knocking. Understood. Isla nodded slowly. Carter left, the door clicking shut behind him. She stood alone in the suite, staring out at the gardens below, and wondered, not for the first time, what exactly she just walked into. Isla thought moving into the estate would be the hardest part of the transition. She had no idea that the real challenge would come 3 nights later, when she woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of Dominic Ashford screaming in his sleep, and discovered that the bulletproof Mafia king was being hunted by ghosts no amount of money or power could kill. The first 2 nights passed quietly. Isla checked on Dominic every 4 hours. His vitals were stable, the sutures were healing cleanly, and he seemed to be resting better than he had in the hospital. Marco had settled into his new room with wide-eyed disbelief, and for the first time in years, Isla allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. Then the 3rd night shattered that illusion. At 2:14 a.m., a guttural, agonized shout tore through the quiet hallway. Isla bolted upright in bed, her heart slamming against her ribs. She grabbed the medical bag she kept beside her nightstand and sprinted barefoot down the hall toward Dominic's quarters. She didn't knock. Carter's instructions had been explicit. She shoved the door open. Dominic was sitting upright in bed, his chest heaving, sweat soaking through the bandages wrapped around his ribs. His hands were clenched into fists so tight his knuckles had gone white, and his eyes, wild, unfocused, stared at something only he could see. Mr. Ashford. Isla crossed the room quickly, setting the medical bag on the nightstand. Dominic, look at me. He didn't respond. His breathing was rapid, shallow, classic hyperventilation. She reached out carefully, placing her hand on his shoulder. You're safe. You're in your room. There's no one here. Just me. His head snapped toward her, and for a split second, she saw something terrifying in his eyes, recognition, but not of her, of someone else, someone who had hurt him. Then just as quickly the fog cleared. His breathing slowed, his fists unclenched. Isla, he rasped, his voice hoarse. I'm here. She kept her hand on his shoulder, grounding him. Your heart rate spiked. I need to check your sutures to make sure you didn't tear anything. He nodded mutely, leaning back against the pillows as she carefully peeled back the bandages. The sutures were intact, but his skin was clammy, his pulse still racing. Nightmare? She asked quietly. Dominic didn't answer immediately. He stared at the ceiling, jaw tight, struggling to rebuild the walls she'd just seen crumble. I don't have nightmares, he finally said. I have memories. Isla didn't push. She finished checking the bandages, then sat down on the edge of the bed, close enough to offer comfort, far enough to give him space. You don't have to talk about it, she said. But if you do, I'm here. Silence stretched between them. Then slowly Dominic spoke. 6 years ago, I was ambushed. Not like this one. Worse. They didn't just want territory. They wanted me broken. They took me to a warehouse, kept me there for 3 days. His voice was flat, clinical, as if reciting someone else's trauma. They didn't kill me because dead men can't be controlled. They wanted leverage. So they made sure I understood exactly what happens when you let your guard down. Isla's chest tightened. She'd seen the scars during wound care, burn marks, old bullet wounds, injuries that spoke of prolonged torture. I got out, Dominic continued, burned the warehouse, killed everyone inside, rebuilt my organization stronger, but I never slept the same again. Because every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that room. He finally turned to look at her. That's why I hired you, Isla. Not just for medical care. Because for 3 nights in that hospital, I slept. Really slept. And I haven't been able to do that since I was 26 years old. The weight of that confession settled over her like a heavy blanket. You're not broken, Dominic, Isla said softly. You're surviving. Surviving isn't living. No, but it's the first step. She stood, intending to let him rest, but his hand shot out, catching her wrist. Not forceful, just desperate. Stay, he said, just until I fall asleep. Please. Isla hesitated. This was crossing a line. She was his nurse, not his therapist, not his whatever this was becoming. But the look in his eyes wasn't the cold, commanding gaze of the Phantom King. It was the exhausted plea of a man who had been fighting alone for too long. She sat back down. I'll stay. Dominic leaned back, his grip on her wrist loosening but not releasing entirely. His breathing gradually evened out, the tension draining from his frame. And for the second time since she'd met him, Isla watched the most dangerous man in the city let himself be vulnerable. She thought staying until he fell asleep would be enough. She had no idea that by morning, Dominic Ashford would make her a third offer, one that had nothing to do with medical care and everything to do with the fact that he'd finally found someone he trusted enough to protect instead of control. Morning light filtered through the heavy curtains of Dominic's quarters, casting soft golden shadows across the dark wood furniture. Isla woke with a start, realizing she'd fallen asleep sitting upright in the armchair beside his bed. Dominic was already awake, propped up against the pillows, watching her with an unreadable expression. You stayed, he said quietly. You asked me to. Isla stretched, wincing at the stiffness in her neck. How are you feeling? Better. He paused. Because of you. She stood, checking his vitals out of habit. Pulse normal, no fever. The nightmares hadn't torn his sutures. Dominic, I can monitor your recovery, but I'm not equipped to handle PTSD. I don't need a therapist. His voice was firm. I need you. Isla froze, her hand still resting on the stethoscope around her neck. What I said last night, Dominic continued, sitting up carefully, I don't say things like that. I don't let people see me like that. But you didn't run. You didn't look at me like I was broken. You just stayed. He reached for a folder on the nightstand, wincing slightly at the movement. He handed it to her. What is this? Isla asked. Contract. Not the 6-week arrangement. Permanent one. She opened the folder. Her eyes widened as she scanned the terms. Full-time private medical care. Salary that was triple what she made at the hospital. Housing for her and Marco. Full benefits. Educational trust fund for her brother. And at the bottom, in bold text, live-in companion and personal confidant. I'm not asking you to be my nurse anymore, Dominic said. I'm asking you to be the person I trust when the walls come down. The person who makes sure I don't lose myself completely. You sleep in the guest suite. You have your own life. But when I need you, when the nightmares come, or when I can't tell the difference between survival and cruelty anymore, you're there. Isla stared at the contract, her mind reeling. You're asking me to be your anchor. I'm asking you to let me pay you for something I can't survive without. His gaze was steady, honest. I know it's not fair. I know I'm asking for more than a medical professional should give. But I'm not offering this as your employer. I'm offering it as someone who finally found a reason to want to survive instead of just existing. Tears pricked at Isla's eyes. This wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't even about safety. This was about two people who had been drowning separately, realizing they could breathe if they held on to each other. If I sign this, Isla said carefully, it's not charity. I'm not your pity case. I do this because I choose to, not because you're paying me. Agreed. She picked up the pen, hesitated, then signed. Dominic exhaled, a sound somewhere between relief and disbelief. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, Isla replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. You just gave a sleep-deprived nurse access to your nightmares and your empire. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. For the first time since she'd met him, Dominic Ashford laughed. Quiet, rough, and entirely genuine. And in that moment, Isla realized she wasn't just the woman hired to keep him alive. She was the person who reminded him what living was for. Isla thought signing the contract would bring stability. She had no idea that 72 hours later, the syndicate that had tortured Dominic 6 years ago would resurface with a message written in blood on her brother's school locker. We found his weakness. Trade her for territory, or we take her anyway. Click the video on your screen right now to see what happens when the Phantom King's enemies realize they didn't just threaten his nurse. They threatened the first person he's loved in a decade. And watch Isla discover that surviving in Dominic's world means learning to fight back just as ruthlessly as he does.